My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds or geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Pound. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic multiverses. Christmas Grinch's franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope. At the time of our recording, Beef Pork Ribs and Mjolnir are anxiously awaiting the birth of their first child. Their due date was, I believe, like 2 days ago. We have not gotten any official word yet on whether this child has arrived yet, but needless to say, they are preoccupied. They are not able to be here to be on this podcast, but fittingly, we have Ben the Movie Buff back with us once again.
Hey, how are you? It's good to be back, guys. It has been too long. I can't entirely remember the last time I was here, but as always, I'm so excited to talk about movies with Average Joe.
Ben the Movie Buff, it is good to see you once again. We usually ask people what they've been up to since they were last on the show. And I understand you've been fairly busy, kind of working in the biz, as they would say.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, the three updates of what I've been up to is working a lot. I just finished a summer movie, which, just to be on the safe side, as usual, I won't say too much about it. But yeah, it's a very summer-themed movie that we just finished a couple days ago. It was pretty good, but I'm looking forward to getting on to the next thing. When it comes to like nerdy things, just because I always like bringing this up, I'm trying to watch all of the Godzilla movies, and there are 36 in total, and I have, I believe, 7 more to go. So I am pretty close, and it's been a really fun ride. I would highly recommend it for anyone who hasn't seen many Godzilla movies. So that's been fun. And last but not least, I am about 6 days away from getting this new 55-inch 4K TV that I have been so patiently waiting for about half a year. So all lots of fun stuff that I've been doing. So yeah, I've been good and I've been busy.
Now, do you include the 1998 American Godzilla in the list of Godzilla movies?
I do, and oddly enough, I think that was actually possibly the first Godzilla movie I saw because it was American, because it was Roland Emmerich, and that's like, one of the names that I recognize, or that I recognize as a teenager. And yes, I would count it as well, even though it's definitely less than ideal, but I basically have been going off this list on like Wikipedia, right? It's like, what are the official Godzilla movies that have been made that are considered part of the lineup? And yes, 98 Godzilla is included there.
That's a lot of fish. That's all I have to say.
Yes, that's right. You're right. You are, Average Joe.
I would love to hear your opinion. This is totally not related to what we're talking about, but you and I think, are both frequenters of the website boxofficemojo.com.
Yep.
And they have completely changed their layout in the past year, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, so I'll be honest. I used to go on Box Office Mojo all the time, and the moment they changed their layout, their look, I believe some features that you could see before were now behind a paywall or something like that. I think like there's a whole bunch of these different changes that were so different from the way things used to be. And I'll be honest, I've been checking Box Office Mojo slightly more often with movies coming back into theaters, but the way it looked before, I understand that like every website is going to be like, oh yeah, let's spruce it up, let's make it new and exciting. But Box Office Mojo had a great look. And I oddly enough, I found that when I was trying to look up what Suicide Squad had made on Friday, for example, I went on to Box Office Mojo like 2 or 3 p.m. on Saturday, and it had the information for all these movies except for Suicide Squad. But Dan Merle, who I've been following for a couple of years now, who does charts, box office charting with Dan, he's been using, because he also doesn't like Box Office Mojo now that it changed, he's now using this website called The Numbers. And when I looked up the numbers did have the information for Suicide Squad for what it made on the Friday, even though Box Office Mojo didn't for some reason. So yeah, I will still kind of check it out here and there. But unfortunately, yeah, it has turned me off a bit that they changed everything as extensively as they did.
I'd never heard. I thought they were the only ones that tracked box office numbers. I'm gonna look up the numbers after this. This is great.
Yeah, Dan Murrell swears by it every time with every episode when he's reporting numbers, whether it's worldwide, international, or domestic. All that information used to come from Box Office Mojo, and it now comes from the numbers because that's just the one that I guess is more readily available, and there's no paywall nonsense. It's just here's all the information you want right here, right now. So yeah, I don't check up the numbers as often as I used to, but I will kind of check it out here or there, and maybe more often as things get back to normal.
Yeah, I might have to make that switch because basically everything you said about Box Office Mojo, I also dislike. It seems like you have to have a paid IMDb subscription now to access a lot of information and it's a lot harder to find things than it used to be.
Yep.
Anyway, everyone, we now know, go to the numbers instead for your box office numbers. And because you mentioned Dan Murrell's show, I'll also plug Movie Math, which is a YouTube show on the Beyond the Trailer channel, which is hosted by Grace Randolph.
Oh, right. Yep.
She's someone I follow for a lot of movie news, and she breaks down box office. And now, since COVID, she's included like streaming numbers in her Movie Math episodes.
Awesome.
So it's neat to see like what's selling the most on the top 10 iTunes charts. Or Nielsen is now like pulling like streaming numbers. So it's really interesting. If you're into that kind of stuff, people probably are like, what are they even going on about? But
yep,
we're movie buffs. Well, I'm a movie fan geek. I don't know if I have the status of movie buff like you do.
I think you're pretty close, Joe. I would call you a movie buff. I would say you are actually quite knowledgeable, and there are certain facts that you'll bring up that I'm like, shoot, I didn't know that. So yeah, no, I would call you a fellow movie buff. And yes, we love box office numbers.
that is the biggest stamp of approval I can get from an actual branded movie buff.
You've earned it.
So this week we are talking about The Suicide Squad. And we, of course, can't talk about The Suicide Squad without bringing up Suicide Squad, which was a movie that came out 5 years ago, hard to believe, in 2016. It was the third film in the DC extended universe where they were attempting to kind of build their own cinematic universe of connected movies. And I remember when this movie was announced and they showed the first photo of all the cast looked like, what Jared Leto was going to look like as the Joker, I was very curious for what this movie was going to be like. And the first trailer they released, set to Queen music, seemed like they were going to try and do their version of Guardians of the Galaxy. So I was optimistic, I guess you could say, when it came out. I was really excited to see characters like Harley Quinn, who I, of course, had known from watching Batman, the animated series, and Justice League and stuff, making her debut in live action. And, from my recollection of watching the movie the one time, I do remember enjoying it. I do remember thinking, wow, this movie isn't perfect. But it certainly was one of those movies that the more I thought about it afterwards, my impression of it kind of just got worse and worse. So, I mean, Ben Movie Buff, I'd love to hear what's your very short hot take on 2016 Suicide Squad.
Yeah, I'm pretty close to you. I think when I first saw it, I thought it was enjoyable enough. I thought it was fine, and there were a lot of people online who were very vocal about how much they despised Suicide Squad. And the more I watched those videos, yes, the more I kind of realized that, okay, there's definitely some problems here and lots of improvements could have been made. But yeah, the one time I saw it, I thought it was just fine. I didn't dislike it. I didn't hate it. I just thought it was entertaining enough.
I want to assemble a task force of the most dangerous people on the planet.
They're bad guys. Worst of the worst.
I can't wait to show you my toys.
We will not let you go. Will not let you go.
Seriously, the hell's wrong with you people?
We're bad guys. It's what we do.
Suicide Squad. Rated PG-13. Experience it in IMAX 3D. August 5th.
Yeah, and of course, as the movie came out, there was all this stuff that came out explaining like what was going on at the studio. George Ayer, or David Ayer. David Ayer was the man chosen to be the writer and director of Suicide Squad. And he was given 6 weeks to write the movie. Now, I don't know how long it usually takes to write a movie like this, but is 6 weeks like a short time?
I guess it depends what kind of movie you're making. I would make the argument that, like a lot of the scripts I read for these Hallmark Lifetime Christmas movies that I do, I feel like 6 weeks is enough for a movie like that because it's just a different breed of movie. It's like 100 pages, pretty basic, not that many characters, that many extras. But for something like Suicide Squad, especially for a movie that is pretty big and there's lots of expectations, and it's also part of a bigger universe where you're trying to have callbacks and references, and then also like mentions to the comics and whatnot. Yeah, I would make the argument that 6 weeks is probably not enough, just given that storytelling and script writing can be, in certain cases, I would say in most cases, pretty difficult. And yeah, sometimes it's like the old man who repairs Woody in Toy Story 2 said, where he's like, "You can't rush art," and it's like it's rushed all the time. But for something like that, I would say 6 weeks is probably a short time to be writing a movie like Suicide Squad.
So they kind of went into production with like a script that was maybe, let's say, the first draft. And so David Ayer was like, well, we'll find the movie while we film the script. And apparently it didn't turn out too well, to the point where they hired this company called Trailer Park to create the first trailer for it. And I don't know, I guess they saw something that wasn't in the footage, and they kind of cut towards a trailer that made it seem like it was going to be this like fun, quirky comedy almost. And the fan reaction was very positive to that. Like, yeah, this is great. It's like Guardians of the Galaxy, but it's DC instead. Unfortunately, what David Ayer was trying to make was what he called a soulful drama. So they ended up doing like extensive reshoots, and then they had like 2 different cuts of the movie. They had the David Ayer cut and the cut that was edited by these people, this Trailer Park company. And I guess they did test screenings for both, and both of them were meh. Like there wasn't a positive reception to either cut. So the final cut that we saw in theaters was like a mishmash of David Ayer's soulful drama, or at least his attempt at that, and the version that was kind of cut together by an editing company. And upon further like rewatches, it's like you can see where all the inconsistencies come from. You can see where things don't make sense. Jared Leto's Joker was very much part of the marketing and the hype around the movie, and he's only in it for like 6 minutes.
Yeah, I gotta say that I do remember seeing the posters and the movie, the trailers with Bohemian Rhapsody and all that. And yeah, I gotta say, like Suicide Squad, as much as the final product was less than ideal, it had great marketing. Even if the marketing kind of changed the product, because it's interesting how you say earlier, Average Joe, that like, oh, even though the script might not be the best I want it to be, like we'll find the movie, right? And that is true. I think sometimes that does happen. Like there's a saying in the film business that you write the movie 3 times. You write it when you're writing the script, you write it when you're filming it, and then you're writing it when you're editing it, because changes can happen when you're shooting it, and then changes can also happen again when you edit it. But from what I can tell, it sounds like the trailer made us think that we were going to see a different movie, because yeah, I definitely did not get soulful drama out of the final product. That yeah, it's almost like instead of finding the movie, they changed the movie in a way, because yeah, both were presented, both were like, that's fine, and they're like, let's just change it up. And yeah, I think that interference kind of, yeah, definitely took it away from what it was trying to be and made it into just an okay movie, which some people would say is a very generous thing to say about 2016 Suicide Squad.
Yeah, and to make matters worse, this was being made around the same time as Batman versus Superman: Dawn of Justice, and like, you know, Ben Affleck's Batman is in this, and like they're meant to be part of the same world. And when that movie came out in March, it had a very mixed reception, and people seemed to really criticize the darker tone. So the studio, seeing that Suicide Squad was going to have that more or less same tone, that also influenced the reshoots. And so like the things they reshot were to make things more funny and more lighthearted. And obviously it didn't work out well for them. It's kind of sad. And when we get to talking about the box office for the new movie, we'll revisit this, but there was genuine interest in these things. Like BVS, Batman versus Superman, made almost $170 million its opening weekend. Suicide Squad, despite having a bunch of characters people had never heard of before outside of the Joker, I think it made like $133 million its opening weekend. Like there was, and it makes me sad as a DC fan. Like clearly 5 years ago, there was a lot of public interest in these movies. And unfortunately, these products that were not good enough essentially have really diminished the brand. So this is not the first time we've talked about Warner Brothers interfering with DC movies. We've talked about it with the Schumacher movies, the Burton Batman movies, the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, of course, the Snyder cut, all these things. And I'm like, how does the studio not learn their lesson to stop getting involved or over involved in the production of their movies?
Yeah, and I mean, what I'm about to say, I think like is definitely a simplified example of this. But I was watching a really interesting video yesterday where someone was just kind of bashing a lot of the blockbusters like Star Wars and Terminator and some of the DC movies of the last 5 or 6 years. And I guess basically what seems to happen is that a lot of the producers, a lot of the people that are high end up on the totem pole making these decisions about whether you need to trim the movie down, whether you need to kind of change the flavor of the movie so it's more fun and playful. I think at the end of the day, they are less concerned about making a good movie and more concerned about the return on their investment, right? So if we're spending $200 million on the budget and $100 million on marketing, we want our movie to make well over $300 million and then some so that we can get a return on investment. Even something like Transformers Revenge of the Fallen is a really bad movie. I'll be the first to say that, or sorry, maybe not the first, but the 1 millionth or whatnot. But yet that movie made $1 billion at the box office. So I don't think any of the producers cared that maybe a lot of people were unhappy with it. They liked the fact that it made money. And you got to wonder if a lot of these producers are really interested in making like decisions based on creativity or maybe decisions based more on financial security and safety. Because I think this is why, like, for example, when they say that like, oh, Batman versus Superman, like, oh, it's too dark or it's too long or whatnot. And of course, the producers, the executives think, oh, it's too long. So if we just shorten it, people will like it better, right? But then you have the problem when you came to the 2017 Justice League is that it felt like it went by in a flash, pun intended. It felt like it went by too quickly, and it should have been a little longer. Yet the studios were the studio was like, oh no, it's got to be shorter. But then you got to think like, okay, Batman versus Superman, like, yes, is kind of a bit of a lead up to Justice League, but Justice League is essentially what the Avengers is doing, where they took all the characters, most of the characters that we'd met in earlier films, and brought them together. So, should that movie have a time constraint like 2 hours, or should it be allowed to breathe a little more to let our characters to be able to learn more about them and understand where they're coming from and this and that. And it just goes to show that just because there might have been a problem with one movie doesn't necessarily mean that, like, oh, let's just fix that problem for another movie. I know it might seem like an obvious thing that, like, oh, Batman versus Superman and Justice League, both comic book movies, both DCEU movies, like, if there's a problem with one, let's just try and get rid of that problem in the other, and then everything's fine. But it can be more complicated than that, right? Batman versus Superman, maybe it was a little too long, and maybe it should have been trimmed down a bit. But oddly enough, the Batman versus Superman 3-hour cut that I actually have in my collection somewhere, when I watched that, I liked it better than the theatrical version that we got. And with the Justice League, Zack Snyder's version earlier this year, that was like nearly 4 hours, I like that one way better than the 2017 version. So I think it just goes to show that producers, I think, will make decisions not to due to creativity, but due to financial security. And that sometimes they might think that, like, oh, all these movies are basically the same. So if there's a problem here, we'll just cut it out in this other movie and everything will be fine. I don't think it's that simple. I think there's far more that goes into it. And I wish that studios would trust their directors more often than they do to say, here's your money. We'll give you some notes on what we think you should do, but ultimately you have the final say, because that is what a director ultimately should be.
Yeah, and unfortunately, David Ayer much like Zack Snyder, has really tried to divorce himself from the theatrical cut of Suicide Squad to like saying it's not my movie, it's not what I was hoping to do. And now there's people kind of campaigning for an Ayer cut of Suicide Squad, which I don't know if I'd be keen on seeing, because even if they hadn't brought in that, you know, trailer park company to like edit the movie and make a separate cut, even if they didn't do reshoots, the story he had come up with in that short time window was not a very good story. Like the reason for the Suicide Squad to exist in that movie doesn't make sense. Like there's all kinds of problems with the plot itself and how it chooses to present the characters, that even if you gave him access to like editing the film again, I'm sure maybe it'd be better, but I can't imagine it being much better.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That all makes sense. I'd still be interested in checking it out. I think just being able to experience Zack Snyder's Justice League earlier this year, to be like, wow, what a difference from like the first version we got to like the kind of final director's cut. It does make me more curious what other movies that maybe were ruined by studio interference could be potentially fixed if they basically re-edited it to what it was supposed to be. So I'd be very curious. Yeah, like it's probably not going to happen, but I would definitely watch it if it did come out at some point.
So despite its negative reception, it did make a lot of money out of the gate, and there seemed to be an audience for Suicide Squad, and certainly like they made plans for the characters to kind of live on and continue on. But it seemed pretty quiet for a while, as if they weren't going to make another Suicide Squad movie. And then in 2019, James Gunn, who of course is the writer and director of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, was fired by Disney and Marvel for a history of inappropriate tweets on social media. And within like a month, I think, of that announcement, it was announced that he was going to be working at Warner Brothers developing a new Suicide Squad movie. And when that news came out, I'm like, this is perfect. Like they were trying to make their version of Guardians of the Galaxy anyway with Suicide Squad, so why not get that guy? But then I thought, but wait, they brought in Joss Whedon to work on Justice League because it was, that was their logic then. Well, we'll get the guy who did Avengers to do Justice League. And that turned out terribly. So, and my initial reaction to James Gunn getting hired for this, I'm like, I have no idea how this is going to go. But I'm curious, Ben Movie Buff, like, how are you reacting to that announcement?
It's funny how maybe many years ago, if you tried to make a comic book movie and it didn't work out for whatever reason, that you would probably wait. Like, for example, when the first Fantastic Four came out, well, I believe there's like a 1990 version. Like there's a pretty old version of it that I hear is not very good. But then 15 years or so later, we have the Tim Story Fantastic Four that comes out in 2005. Then a sequel that comes out, I think, in 2007, Rise of the Silver Surfer. Right. But then it was another 8 years before we got the Josh Trank one. Now, what I'm getting at is that at least like there was a bit of space, like so many years before they tried to revamp it, right? So it's interesting how with Suicide Squad coming out in 2016, that literally 3 years later, the Suicide Squad gets announced with all these cast members, some returning, which I think is kind of cool, a lot of new ones, and that James Gunn is going to do it. And honestly, my reaction was like, oh, cool. I don't know if I really care or want to go see it, but like, hopefully the people that do want a better Suicide Squad will get it, and hopefully that they'll enjoy it. But I think it was just because of the turnaround. It was the fact that at that point, I had already seen the Suicide Squad 3 years earlier, thought it was fine, and I was just like ready to move on with other stuff. There were other movies and superhero films and comic book films that I was looking forward to seeing. I think just like when you see an okay movie like Suicide Squad, I didn't feel like I needed another one. So my reaction was like, I was happy for the people that wanted it, but I really wasn't one of the people that cared that much.
They really, they mentioned this, they kind of announced this big giant cast that was going to be in the film. And I remember when they did their presentation at DC Fandom last year, James Gunn was all like, nobody's safe here. Like anybody could die. Because that was certainly part of the complaint people had about 2016 Suicide Squad, was that even though it's meant to be this concept where any character could be disposable, no one was really disposable. Like the one character they kill off, it's like you knew he wasn't important. So initially I was very interested. I'm like, this is a very diverse cast. I wonder who they're playing. And then when they start announcing some of the characters, I'm like, these are very obscure DC Comics characters. Like, he's really dug into the history of DC to pull these characters. And then when we finally got like a look at what the movie was going to look like and what the costumes are going to look like, I was like, wow, like this is surprisingly comics accurate and very colorful in comparison to a lot of the other DC movies. So I was certainly excited, but I was kind of on the same page. I wasn't like overwhelmingly excited. I think this probably would have been better to give it more time to breathe. But of course, like Harley Quinn is a very popular DC character, and naturally, like I guess they wanted to at least keep Margot Robbie working in that role. So at the very least, they had to keep this movie alive as a vehicle for her to continue to be involved. And they announced it was going to be an R-rated movie. So that was another complaint people had about Suicide Squad 2016, that it was PG-13, and this is the kind of movie that would probably benefit from an R rating. So hearing that this one's going to get that seemed like everything was kind of going in their favor, and they really emphasized that James Gunn was involved in all the marketing for this new one. They're like, from the whatever they call like the wild, crazy mind of James Gunn, and it's like on the poster, it's like a James Gunn film, and you know, he's the sole writer and director of this movie. So this is literally his creative vision. And I was very disappointed when I saw the box office numbers today. There seemed to be a lot of different variables here, but it's looking like in its opening weekend, The Suicide Squad, they really should have thought of a better name. Just adding the onto it. I mean, that's something like the Fast and the Furious movies did.
Exactly,
but
yeah.
Like, just give it a subtitle or something that distinguishes it more from the other movie.
Yep.
Anyway, The Suicide Squad only made like $27 million its opening weekend.
Yeah.
Which, you think about it, compared to the original, that's like over $100 million less than its predecessor.
Yeah, and of course you got to wonder, because Dan Murrell says this all the time on box office charts, is that it only made $27 million, but we of course are still kind of in a pandemic. Even though things are looking up and more movies are coming out, more people are going to see movies, you have the movie opening in a pandemic, and then you also have the fact that I believe it dropped on HBO Max the same day it was released. So how many people that might have seen it in the theaters, if HBO Max wasn't an option, like, would that have boosted the numbers? Now, I'd like to guess that if HBO Max was not part of the deal and we weren't in a pandemic, I don't think it would have made anywhere near the amount that the first one did, because I think a lot of people that saw the first one and didn't like it might have just given up, might have just said, like, I'm not seeing this movie. I just don't care, which was kind of me for a while until you asked me to do this podcast. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'll go see it. But I would like to believe that if things were normal, the movie probably would have made, I would say, around 50 million. Because I think, like, you have that R rating, right? So already that means, like, any young kids that want to go see the movie can't unless they have someone old enough to take them. But yeah, I think it would have made more money easily if things were normal. But I think we have the HBO Max thing that might have been taking some people away. And also, it's still a pandemic. I don't know how many people have the money or feel safe going into a movie theater.
Yeah, apparently in the United States, the Delta variant of COVID is rampant.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's been an overall trend, admittedly, with movies in general in the last month, that like some movies are opening big, but then they drop off really hard in their second week. So, and Grace brought this up in her video about the movie math for this weekend. Mm-hmm. She said maybe there's some people who just actually, like, they have not forgiven James Gunn for the controversy that got him fired from Marvel. Maybe some people are like, nope, like, I'm not going to see anything involving this guy. Maybe Guardians 3, and it'll be interesting when Guardians 3 comes out. It's like, will that movie suffer from, you know, is James Gunn ruined for the rest of his career now? We don't know. I was certainly hoping that the branding of James Gunn would kind of bring more people to this movie. Be like, okay, like, yeah, I didn't love that Suicide Squad movie, but I love Guardians of the Galaxy. I love Marvel, and this is the guy who did those. So yeah, I was hoping that he would kind of bring him in, and in a sense he hasn't. And that's the other problem, as you point out, there's all these variables, like we don't know, you know, pandemic, available for streaming, James Gunn's history.
Yep.
It has the claim of being the highest opening for an R-rated movie in the pandemic, but like not by much. I think Mortal Kombat made like $3 million less than that
I
when
think
it
you're
opened in April.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of disappointing, and especially disappointing because like the critics seem to really like it. So I was like, great, if the critics like it, that means people will go see it, right?
Not always.
Not necessarily the case. I mean, the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is like 85, which is I think is still pretty high, but it hasn't translated to money at the box office. And this movie's budget was like $185 million. So once you throw in the promotions, it probably cost close to $300 million to make this thing. So this is, I mean, the way I see it, this is on its way to becoming a huge bomb.
Yeah, it could be. And it's tough, right? I mean, like, I guess that's the risk you take when you have, because let's remember too that I would say besides, maybe like some of the Matrix movies and Deadpool and whatnot, R-rated movies tend to not have as gigantic budgets as Marvel movies or Star Wars films. Like a lot of the times, like it's PG-13 and down that can easily have $200 million budgets and such. But I think, having an R-rated $185 million budget movie being released with all of the caveats that we said, with all the things that might be taking away from its performance, it is a hard sell. And I mean, I still applaud them for trying, because like it means we got to see it now and not, and we didn't have to wait like if it was postponed to like next year or whatnot. But yeah, it is a hard sell to be honest. But I guess it was worth a shot, and it might be a bit of a bomb, but it also had a lot of is a tall order given the circumstances, the playground that it's playing in, to do as well as they were hoping it would.
Yeah, and then my other fear is that maybe the DC brand in general has just been so there's just no coming back.
Maybe.
Because if you look at all the DC movies released in the last year, you got Birds of Prey, you got Wonder Woman 1984, and then you got this. It's like none of them have done well at the box office. So I'm like, it breaks my heart to say maybe DC is done being successful at the movies. Maybe the general audiences there's just too much of a, oh, I don't like DC movies.
Yeah, maybe. Like, I don't know. Like, I was hoping, I mean, you're right that like with Birds of Prey and Wonder Woman 1984 not doing the greatest, I was hoping that like Zack Snyder's Justice League, which seems to have gotten overwhelmingly positive reviews from both critics and fans alike, I would hope that might have been something to get people kind of, because like just this year, I watched the Zack Snyder Justice League cut, I watched Wonder Woman 1984 at home, and then I got to see the Suicide Squad a couple days ago. So there's been like a lot of like DC stuff coming out recently. So, but yeah, there might have been like too many hits on their record, if you will, right? Like, 3 strikes and you're out. And with the exception of Zack Snyder's Justice League, that a lot of the things we've gotten in the last year and a half haven't been the greatest. So it's possible, and I guess time will tell when we have other DC movies coming out in the next year or so to see if they do any better or not.
All right, let's just dive on into this movie. Give us the Blu-ray case description that will hopefully eventually come for The Suicide Squad.
They said you got in trouble.
I stole.
Next time you take a partner, and they can be your lookout.
You're a terrible father, okay?
Successfully complete the mission, you get 10 years off your sentence.
You want me to what? Just to save the world.
Oh.
Wowza. Where's my dad?
We're all gonna die. I hope so. Oh, for God's sake.
So the Suicide Squad is pretty similar to the 2016 version in the sense that the Suicide Squad is a whole bunch of hardened, nasty criminals that are released from jail temporarily to go on a mission where they will probably die, hence the title. And if they survive this mission, they will get something like 10 years off their prison sentence, right? So there's big benefits for doing this mission. And the mission all these rogues and criminals have to go on is going to this secret scientific facility, which I think is located somewhere in like South America or whatnot. It's on this kind of like very foreign island, and they have to go there and they have to destroy this facility, even though they don't know a huge amount about exactly like what's going on here or the past or like what they're working on specifically. But of course, as the movie goes on, they will get to learn more about each other, and they will learn what's going on at this facility, all while having to slaughter a whole bunch of bad guys in the process.
So, in my opinion, this is the better Suicide Squad movie. Like, if
Absolutely.
you stack this up next to the previous, it's like it's not even a competition.
No way.
Which just it breaks my heart when I think of the box office. I'm like, this, like, if we could somehow like do some weird time travel and like put this one in theaters 5 years ago,
Yeah.
And that be the one that came out when there was all this public interest, I feel like this would have done so much more for the franchise.
I'll be honest, like as I said earlier, I was not really looking forward to this movie. I had little expectations, and I'll be honest, like I was only kind of going to see it because we were going to talk about it on the podcast. So I'm like, okay, I guess I'll give it a shot. And that's one of the pleasures of being a fan of movies, being a movie buff, is when you sit down to watch a movie and you literally have no idea how great the movie will be. Like, this movie floored me. This movie surprised me. It was way more strange than the first one, which I think was awesome. It was actually pretty funny, even though there's lots of vulgar humor and this and that. There were some genuinely funny jokes that I thought were very entertaining. And it is a movie that I think, like, the first half hour is fine. I was like, okay, this is pretty decent, I guess. But it did get better. With each passing scene, there was either some cool action, some nice montage set to a song, or some backstory, some depth that actually kind of made you feel for the characters. Because I think that is one thing that was definitely lacking. As entertaining as the first one is, I don't feel like, maybe save for Harley Quinn, do we really get to know these characters that well. I feel it's like, oh, this thing, that thing, now you know the character, right? Like, it just feels like very lazy, which I know, I'm sure maybe in David Ayer's original version might have been better, but it just feels like very basic, simplistic kind of character development. But I felt like in this movie, there were actually opportunities where we allowed our characters to breathe, where they talked to each other, where they talked about their past, and we got to learn more about them. And we also got to see certain arcs of, like, a character is this way at the beginning of the movie, and then we get to see them change by the end of the movie. And it actually blew me away when it came to how much I loved this movie. Because I was expecting to, halfway through the movie, I was like, this is pretty good. I'm actually enjoying this. But there were just so many things that were right. It's such a good sense of balance. And it's funny, like, the movie is disgustingly violent. It is so foul-mouthed. There are so many parts where I'm like, oh God, that was gross. Oh, I don't need to hear this. I don't need to hear that. But I guess, like as it's been said before, I think the Suicide Squad is kind of like Guardians of the Galaxy on steroids, right? Where it's just like, imagine if these people were meaner and nastier and swore more often, you might get something like the Suicide Squad. And I was surprised at how much I enjoyed this movie, so much so that I had to do a Facebook status and just say, guys, you might be like me and think, like, why do we need another Suicide Squad after 5 years? But trust me, please go see it. It's really good. And yeah, I loved it. I thought it was amazing.
We really see what James Gunn is like when he doesn't have any filters on. Because that's a complaint people have about Marvel movies, is they feel samey. And even for his ones which are, more out there, there still is, like, Kevin Feige breathing down your neck, involved with the whole process from start to finish. So you really get to see, like, what would James Gunn do if he didn't have to worry about making it a PG-13 movie, or if he didn't have to worry about, like, following the Marvel timeline or whatever. And you do see a lot of what he does in the Guardians movies well. Like, his use of music is very intentional, as opposed to 2016 Suicide Squad, where it's just basically jukebox.
Yeah, it's just like pop songs, and people are like, oh, I know that song. That's about it.
Or you mentioned the characters in the movie, like, that you actually have character arcs and you feel things for the characters, and they're used for comedy in various different ways. Did it feel too much like Guardians of the Galaxy, or is the fact that he's essentially on steroids, did that make it different enough?
Yeah, it was interesting. As I was watching the movie, the two movies it reminded me a lot of was Guardians of the Galaxy and also Deadpool, because Deadpool is another example of a movie that has lots of violence and like is pretty crude and vulgar at points, but, like, it still has a heart. And even like the first Guardians of the Galaxy is kind of like a more watered down version in the sense that like they can't have too much craziness or violence or language going on, but it still had a heart. And I think the biggest difference from Guardians of the Galaxy and the Suicide Squad is the fact that the Guardians of the Galaxy, I would say, although they're still kind of rogues and doing things that they shouldn't do, I think they are definitely on the spectrum of purity. Like when we talk about like heroes being pure, and then there's like anti-heroes and whatnot, that I think Guardians of the Galaxy are closer to being pure heroes, whereas the Suicide Squad, even though they definitely have their heroic moments in the movie, it's like all the conversations they have, all the things that they do, all of the mistakes they make are like things that you would never see in Guardians of the Galaxy, because Guardians of the Galaxy,
They're villains.
Yeah, exactly. Like they are villains, and they make a few good decisions here or there. But even then, there's still something that they kind of do towards the end of the movie, which if we get into spoiler zone, we can talk about a bit more. But like I'd still argue they're still villains. They're still wild cards, and will do whatever they want. But I think it's just the fact that obviously there are lots of parts of the Suicide Squad that still feel like a comic book movie, right? Like it's colorful. There's still lots of CGI. Shark King is kind of like Groot, except
King Shark.
King Shark. Right? Yeah. My apologies. King Shark is kind of like Groot, except for the fact that like he literally like he's just more vicious and eats people, and I guess has a slightly better vocabulary than Groot, because Groot can just say "I am Groot, we are Groot," and that's about it. But that's a good thing, is that it still reminded me of those movies, but it still felt just far stranger, far more vulgar and violent than something that Guardians of the Galaxy would have done. So it's kind of like, a distant relative, but still, not terribly close.
Yeah, I almost wonder if the crudeness is a drawback, and that's partly why it hasn't done as well financially, because there were certain lines, like certain things that even Harley says, I'm like, did she really need to say that?
Yeah.
Did that really need to be in this movie?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we're kind of moving in a culture that is trying to be more conscious of what's appropriate, what isn't appropriate. Yeah. I think perhaps James Gunn might have benefited from someone looking over his script and kind of maybe editing some of his jokes, because I don't know how to say it. I feel like this is 100% James Gunn, and I feel like maybe it should have been 80% James Gunn.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And I mean, I'll be honest too here. Like, there are, as much as I can kind of appreciate and think that like for the flavor, it makes sense for it to be as violent and as crude as it is, I don't know if I would necessarily what's the word, defend every single crude and vulgar and violent thing that happens in the movie, right? And it's kind of like Deadpool as well. Like, there's still, as much as I love Deadpool, there are still a few moments in Deadpool where it's like, I could have done without that vulgar joke. I didn't need to see that thing. And you could have, kind of toned it down a little bit, but still have it vulgar and violent enough to still get across what Deadpool is supposed to be like, the merc with the mouth. So yeah, and I mean, remember, like, Suicide Squad is still like 2 hours and 12 minutes, I think. So the movie is still pretty long enough that I feel like maybe it could have benefited from a little bit of trimming here and there from certain jokes that, or certain things that we see that we didn't need exactly. But I can still understand why they want to show that these guys are cruel, they're nasty. We don't want to get too comfortable with them. Like, oh, maybe I'll swear once in a while, but not too much, right? Like, I can still understand that it has to be pretty gritty and nasty to show just how bad these bad guys are.
Yeah, this really does benefit from, it's like a soft reboot in a sense, because there are certain characters who reprise their roles from the previous Suicide Squad movie, and they don't really take any time to explain what the Suicide Squad is, because they're kind of assuming that you at least know what it is. So admittedly, the movie does benefit from being associated with the previous one.
Yep.
But I could argue, like, you don't need to have watched 2016 Suicide Squad to enjoy this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember when they were when Suicide Squad from 2016 was first announced, and they were asking like a comic book expert to say, like, explain to us, for people that don't know, like, what is the Suicide Squad? And they said, like, oh, it's basically a comic book version of the Dirty Dozen. And for someone like me, it's like, oh yeah, like that totally makes sense. Like, that's all you need to say. So yes, I would like to think that, if not by the trailers, that the movie, will basically does a pretty good job of, the Suicide Squad. You want 10 years off your sentence, you have to go on a squad where, you know, it's literally suicide. And there you are.
Yeah, I think the idea of the Suicide Squad is a very interesting idea. To say that the American government would essentially go this route of saying, like, well, these people are disposable, they're criminals, like nobody will care if they die.
Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting story. And it also, like, against their will, it essentially forces, I mean, sometimes people are like recruited, like forced into the Suicide Squad, and sometimes it's like their choice.
Yeah.
But essentially you're taking people who are villainous or have done some kind of criminal act, and you're forcing them to not necessarily do something heroic, because there's often like Black Ops missions that are like too dangerous to send regular soldiers. But they're being forced, like they're being conscripted to do something for the sake of what is perceived as the common good, or the better, you know, the good of others. And I find like something dark and like just psychologically fascinating about that whole idea that this even exists. Like, you imagine if there was like a Task Force X in the real world, and like if that were to come to light that the government was doing that, like that would, it's kind of crazy. And I guess it's the kind of thing that we can only, like, as something like The Purge, you know, it's like, it's too crazy to think about actually happening. But
yeah, and I think that what also makes it interesting too, especially from a lot of the comic book movies that we've seen in the last 20 or 30 years, is that, once again, it's kind of simplifying it, but I do think that a lot of our comic book superhero movies are normally characters that may be flawed, but are still pretty good people, right? They're still trying to do the right thing. Even in cases of like Wolverine or Batman, maybe they have a dark past, maybe they did some things that they shouldn't have done, but like they're not in prison, they're not perceived as villains, they're still heroes, even if they're anti-heroes. So yeah, I think that's why movies like Suicide Squad, and more importantly, The Suicide Squad, are fascinating, is because your protagonists, in a way, like are not technically antagonists, but your protagonists are bad guys, are criminals, are villains. And yeah, it's always interesting to see like how much of a hero do we see in the movie versus them being a villain, because I'd like to think there are there are arguments for both as to like, are they more heroes now by the end of the movie, are they more villains? And I think by doing that, like, sometimes it's more fun to kind of be with characters like Deadpool or the Suicide Squad than characters like, I mean, and don't get me wrong, like I love the Avengers, I love Spider-Man and all that, but we are used to seeing a lot of characters that are for more or less are good. And with Deadpool and the Suicide Squad, or heck, even, anyways, I would say the Suicide Squad, it's interesting to see, what happens when you get the baddest of the bad, and like these are the characters you're stuck with for the movie. Like what's that going to be like, and how also because it's one thing when like the Avengers are like, oh, having family problems or whatnot and drama, and they have to like work through it, but then it's another thing when you have crazy people and murderers and thieves and this and that. What happens when you put them together? Can they still make it work like the Avengers can?
Now, the plot of this movie, as Ben the Movie Buff explained in his Blu-ray case description, is pretty standard for this kind of like Black Ops kind of military mission sort of movie. But what makes it is, of course, the characters, like the people we're journeying with. And the cast, they work off of each other really well, in my opinion. The cast, if you look at the poster, like there's a lot of characters in this movie, and a lot of them die. Like, we will get into who dies in the spoilers. Almost like, and I was surprised, honestly, with some of the characters that were killed off. I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting them to die. Some of the ones I kind of guessed they were going to die because they weren't in as much of many of the trailers and whatnot. So I'm like, okay, they'll probably be killed off early. But the number of characters, like very few characters, I don't know, this probably isn't a spoiler, but very few characters actually survive all the way through to the end of the movie. And just the dynamics of the characters, like John Cena as Peacemaker and Idris Elba as Bloodsport. I'm like, these guys are hilarious in the way they kind of play off of each other. And even like Polka Dot Man, a very obscure Batman villain from like the 1950s, has a prominent role in this movie as part of the Suicide Squad, and I actually found him very entertaining.
I thought the whole cast was awesome. Even the people that are in the movie very briefly, I thought they were all fantastic. I got to give a shout out to, Idris Elba was awesome. Margot Robbie is always like, I hope she plays Harley Quinn for like another, and she's still like, she's younger than me. So I hope she still plays this role for like another 10, 12 years before she maybe moves on to other stuff. She's always a joy to watch. The girl who plays Ratcatcher 2, I think was also fantastic. She has so many great moments. She is easily the heart of the movie, and she nailed it. Like the whole cast is great. And what's pretty awesome too is that John Cena is someone who, like, I don't know if you've seen Ferdinand, but like I watched Ferdinand last year, and I thought like he gave a great voice performance. Like there's actually like a lot of feeling, and you'd be surprised hearing that voice performance and then being like, oh, he was a wrestler. And it's like, but yeah, like no, he was actually, I don't know whether he got training or whether he just has like good instinct for performance, but like he was good in Ferdinand. He got a few laughs out of me from Daddy's Home too. And in this movie, there were a number of moments where I was like, wow, like this is John Cena. This is like the hearing that phone calling prank with like the John Cena announcer and this and that. Like it's so funny how you kind of put certain people into a box and you're like, oh, he's just a wrestler, right? But John Cena, along with Dave Bautista and Dwayne Johnson, because we know him as Dwayne Johnson now. It's pretty awesome to see how these guys have really kind of gotten out of their wrestling box and they're like, no, wait, I can do more. And John Cena, like the whole cast is awesome. But I think a number of the characters that we spend a good amount of the movie with, and including Polka Dot Man as well, like these obscure, strange people. It didn't take that long until I got very invested in them and actually cared about whether they lived or died. Because once again, that's something that the 2016 version kind of lacked, is that the one unimportant character gets killed off pretty quickly. And I think everyone was like, yeah, it's not a surprise, moving on. And most of the other characters survive, right? So I think to have a lot of these characters and like every couple scenes, one of them is dying, this or that is happening. There were some times where I would audibly react and be like, oh shoot, they killed him? And I'm like, I guess it makes sense, but like it would still kind of throw me off guard. And I think it's because, as we've seen in a lot of comic book superhero movies, like, oh, it's the villains or like the very minor characters that will probably die. A lot of the main characters we need for the sequel or for other installments, they'll live. But here, we won't say who, but I was actually surprised on a number of occasions that the characters they decided to kill off. So yes, I was very invested.
There's also very clever work of use of word art.
Yes, absolutely.
I was like, this is fun. Like I kind of got tired of it towards the end, but I'm like, whatever, it's a bit, they're sticking with it. And it was just the fun way to do transitions. It kind of felt like a comic book come to life in a way.
Yeah, they were mentioning that, how like I've seen lots of like Lars von Trier is a director who like he doesn't do comic book movies, but like the movies I've seen of his, he and I think some other directors, will kind of have that trademark of like chapters. Like they'll literally, like before the movie even starts, it's like chapter 1. An inconvenient truth or something like that, and then by the end of that chapter we then understand why it's called an inconvenient truth, right? But I thought the titles were very creatively done, and I think it does kind of make it feel like issues of a comic book, right? That you'd read for 15-20 minutes, and then after that issue's done, you'd move on to the next issue, which was called this. And I like them. I've seen lots of movies that have like chapter intertitles and whatnot, and I thought these were very nice to look at, and also lots of variety too. So you never got bored of seeing the same kind of writing. It's just, like it was fun to see what they would do next with the font and the size and all that.
And before I go into the spoilerverse, I just gotta say, there's all these movie tropes and things you complain about. I always hated in movies when like characters are in like a foreign country, and the the people that they're talking to are speaking a foreign language, and then they just sort of switch to English. It's like, oh, or even worse, the characters are all native to a different language, but then they're talking English to each other anyway for the sake of us, the American North American audience. In this movie, that doesn't happen. I was like, every scene where there's characters who would only be speaking a foreign language, it's all in that language with subtitles. And the only time that you hear those characters speak English is when they're speaking to English speaker.
Yes.
And I was like, bravo, James Gunn, you did it. I wish every other movie would stop doing that, but reading isn't that hard, people.
Exactly, it's really not. And I mean, it's not like you're watching a foreign film where, like, I watched an Iranian film a couple years ago where, like, there's lots of fast talking, and this movie is 2 hours long. And that, coming from someone who loves watching foreign films, that was a bit of a chore to keep up with all the reading. But it's like, yeah, like the few subtitles here and there, like, you guys will be okay.
So we're going to just dive on into the spoilerverse now. There'll be a time code in the show notes to alert you to when the spoilers are popping up. So if you want to return to our spoiler-free final thoughts, you can skip around here because we're now inside the spoilerverse. Ooh. When they get to that beach, I was not expecting like that many people to die.
Yeah.
Especially Boomerang.
Yeah.
Like I did not expect Jai Courtney to die. I'm like, they brought him back from the old movie because he was one of the few characters that was decent, and that was a genuine surprise. I'm like, oh, I guess he's off. I mean, I guessed most of those people were going to die. Like even Nathan Fillion's character, I'm like, yeah, these people are going to die.
Of course.
But I was not expecting Captain Boomerang to die.
I was also I thought what was hilarious was when all the characters jump off of the plane into the water, and then Weasel kind of comes down, and like I was like, Weasel's gonna body slam into the water, right? But then he can't swim, and then he dies. He dies. Now that we're in the spoilerverse, he dies initially, and then turns out that he didn't die because right after the movie, he does actually wake up and starts running around. But yeah, I thought that was the first funny joke. It's like no one checked to see if this Weasel thing could swim. Everyone's just like, oh shoot, that might have been a good thing to do if you have to go into water and then get to the beach. But yes, it was a massacre, and I think that's actually a really great way to show your audience that no one is safe when all those people are dying left, right, and center, to show that, yeah, if there are characters you like, enjoy the time you have with them because they could die by the end of this movie.
Yeah, and those are all DC Comics characters. Like they're very obscure ones. Like I'd most of them never heard of before.
Yeah,
like
me neither.
Javelin, Savant. I was like, I've never heard of you before, and it makes sense that they didn't stick around for very long.
Yeah.
But it's certainly like that beach scene, it really, in my opinion, set the tone for the whole movie.
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
And then to find out that, oh, actually this B squad, or this these are the people we're going to be following for most of the film. But even in that group, they don't all make it.
That's
out.
right.
Like you're led to believe Peacemaker dies.
Yeah.
And then Polka Dot Man dies. And I was like, no, not Polka Dot Man. I really liked Polka Dot Man. Only someone as twisted as James Gunn would find a way to give a guy like that a traumatic backstory, but then also somehow find a way to make it comedic.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, no, that was actually, and that was like another funny, so on top of giving Polka Dot Man that backstory, yeah, I just thought it was funny that once you set up him seeing his mother everywhere he goes, it's like you kind of laugh in a cringy way when Polka Dot Man is dancing in the bar and all the girls around him look like his mother, and then seeing Starro at the end looking like a big, like his mother. Like it just, like there was lots of great things that were set up pretty early on and that were definitely paid off by the end of the movie. Yeah, and of course, like that was just a nice moment of relief too, to like see all those characters dead, and then to see the B Squad and go, oh right, I did see those characters in the promotional material. Okay, this makes sense. And one of the reasons why I like trying to avoid too many trailers or clips or whatnot, because I think sometimes they will kind of tell you who's important and who's not. So
sometimes, every time.
Yeah, exactly.
Trailers are the worst these days.
Yep, that's right. They do give too much away. So I did like that kind of like, okay, so what happens to the movie now if it looks like everyone's going to die on that beach? And then we go, oh, right, there's a secondary squad. Okay, this makes sense. And then we get to follow them from there.
I mean, Harley Quinn was really the only character. I'm like, they're not going to kill off Harley Quinn.
There's no way.
Basically, everybody else was on the chopping block.
Exactly.
The rumor is that that James Gunn originally wrote this in mind with Deadshot coming back, with like Will Smith's character coming back, and there was a rumor that Idris Elba was just going to be taking over the role of Deadshot, but they decided to kind of introduce a different character in the place of Deadshot for this movie, so that if Will Smith wants to come back like later on, which probably won't happen now based on how this movie's doing, which I think I was okay with because it's like Bloodsport. He was like Deadshot. He was enough like Deadshot, but he wasn't exactly the same.
Yeah, I was definitely getting Deadshot vibe. I honestly thought I thought that was the same character, but then like Bloodsport, I'm like, wasn't the other guy called Deadshot? but yeah, it felt like a pretty similar character. But yeah, I think Idris Elba, just killed it.
When I think about that beach scene, I'm now like, wow, Amanda Waller is super, like, she is super sadistic to like recruit all these random people for the Suicide Squad and then be like, yeah, you're basically just meant to be cannon fodder so that these other people can get in. And I was like, dang, like that's brutal. She felt very evil in this one.
Yeah,
like
yeah, definitely.
Like to the point that her staff have to like knock her out
with a golf club.
Yeah. I'm like, dang, like, I mean, I guess that's, if you think about it, somebody who's willing to do this to all these people and essentially take away their free will. I guess she's really, in my opinion, she's the real villain of this.
Yeah, no, and I was going to say that too. It's almost like Starro is the big, I guess you could say like physical threat, like kind of one of the antagonists, if you will, like the big baddie. But in a way, it's like the real antagonist from the very beginning. Yeah, I would argue that as well, is definitely Amanda Waller.
That was one complaint I did have, is that the reveal that, oh, like they're being sent to cover up something bad that the American government did. I was like, I feel like this is that. I mean, again, like this is clearly more character focused than plot focused. But I'm like, I would say this is almost like a cliche story beat from like movies like this, where it's like, oh yeah, it's always about the American government doing bad stuff somewhere, and it's like we're always trying to cover it up.
Yeah, now be that as it may, I would argue that the thing I liked the most about that was the fact that, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if in the first Suicide Squad, if there's too many moments where the actual Suicide Squad are like turning on each other. I think for the most part, I mean, like they'll have arguments and whatnot, but I think for the most part they do work fairly well together when it comes to having to defeat the bad guy in the first one. Whereas this time around, I liked that this Peacemaker guy who's like, oh, I may have to kill 500 people, but I'm keeping the peace. I like that it turned him against the other characters. Right, and that, of course, as cliched as it is, I like that the other characters were like, no, I don't feel comfortable destroying this. We need to share it with the public. And Peacemaker's like, oh, well, if you're going to do that, I'm literally just going to kill anyone that gets in my way, even anyone that's on my team. So I think that kind of gave like something for that character to do, and gave more conflict. Because, like, I don't know, do you remember like the characters in the first Suicide Squad like turning on each other and being willing to kill each other?
Well, their mission was so stupid. They had to like rescue Amanda Waller from the town, and then all of a sudden Enchantress kind of goes berserk.
Right,
so
yeah.
There never really was a good reason for them to argue with each other. So like there is like a moral dilemma that's presented in this movie that wasn't there before.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I'm really thankful they kept as many of the cast from the previous film as possible, because, like, in my opinion, they brought back everybody who did a good job with the last
who
one.
deserved to come back.
Yeah, to the point I was like disappointed that Captain Boomerang was killed off.
Exactly.
Right
Yeah.
Dang it! Gotta subvert my expectations.
Well, exactly. Yeah, and here's another surprise that I really liked. That I honestly, as I saw it happening, so you have Harley Quinn kind of getting into a romantic relationship with one of like the, I guess, political leaders. I can't remember exactly what his title was, but like an important person that was talking about like, oh, here's what we're doing with the scientific laboratory and whatnot. I loved how you have that kind of great montage of them getting along and whatnot. I thought it was hilarious that when they're kind of like, you know, getting hot and heavy, that they knock some candles on the ground and it causes a fire. I was kind of half expecting that when they're lying on the ground after the deed is done, that is going to cut to a wide shot and the whole place is on fire and they're just like not paying attention to what's going on in the back because they're so in love with each other. But when Harley Quinn kills him, I was expecting him to live a little longer. I honestly, like, I think the movie, James Gunn did a great job of making this guy seem really important and feeling like, well, if anyone's going to die, it's going to be people in the Suicide Squad, not this guy. So the fact that when Harley Quinn shoots him and then she's like, oh, I told myself if I ever saw a red flag like this, I'd just kill the person. I thought, like, that also kind of surprised me, but kept turned the story on its head, kept things moving, because I thought that he was going to like betray Harley Quinn or do something bad to her later on, and I love that she's like, nope, I'm just going to kill you first. But then of course it's like the other guys will be kind of be torturing Harley Quinn a little bit until she's able to escape. So I was expecting that guy to live at least another like half hour, and the fact that they killed him off when he did, that caught me off guard.
Yeah, she had that really great action scene where she's basically like breaking out of the place.
Yes, so good. And I love, once again, another great joke, how they're getting ready to go and save her, and then she's like, "Hi guys," and they just turn around. They're just like, "What are you doing here?" She's like, "Oh, were you going to escape me? I can go back in if you want to rescue me." It's like, you're already there. Let's just move on to something else. There was just a lot of fun ways to play with a very basic story. Because yeah, like even the setup when Amanda Waller is like, "Here's your mission," it's like, okay, pretty basic, nothing terribly new or exciting. But James Gunn still does a lot of fun and exciting things with it, which I appreciated.
Like King Shark, as played by Sylvester
Yes.
Stallone.
Oh man, like once again, kind of reminded me of Groot, but man, that moment where, like, okay, two great moments with King Shark. So one, when he tries to eat Ratcatcher, and Ratcatcher kind of who's it? Bloodsport reacts with violence. He's like, the only way to teach this guy to not eat our team is by shooting him. But then I love how Ratcatcher is like, you wouldn't eat your friends, right? We're your friends. Like, I thought that was such a great way of showing how, like, one person deals with the situation the way he thinks is the best, but then the other character deals with it in a way that is actually more effective. So I thought that was great. And then when King Shark sees the kind of, like, aquatic life in that big room, and he's kind of jumping and kind of moving around and whatnot, there's just something about that that's so beautiful in a movie that has so much violence and language and vulgar content, because it's almost like maybe he feels like he connects more with these fish than he does with the actual people that he's working with, only to find out that the fish actually try to attack him afterwards. And it's like, no, these people, it's hard to connect with them, but they are in a way your family. So I thought those moments were both great, and both gave a lot of depth to a character that is like, eat people, like says a few words here and there, doesn't say much, but James Gunn still does a lot with the character, which was so good.
So I was excited in the one trailer when they showed that Starro the Conqueror was going to be in this, because longtime DC fans like myself would know that Starro the Conqueror was the first villain the Justice League fought in the comic books.
Wow, okay, cool.
So he's pretty famous, and for obvious reasons, like he's got a very strong visual, and his whole gimmick of like, mind controlling people with the starfish. So I was immediately kind of disappointed that this version of the Suicide Squad was able to like take him out. I'm like, this is the threat that required the forming of the Justice League initially, and it's being handled by rats and a shark man and a clown girl with a javelin. It was kind of underwhelming. But it was really great to see him, and like, he looked pretty good with the CG.
Yeah, I do think the one thing, it was funny, it actually took me a little while to realize this, but the one thing that I did think was actually very threatening about Starro is that obviously you have like all the soldiers firing at him, and it's like, that does nothing, right? And then he just releases stars out of his armpit, and then it's like, oh crap, mind control, which once again, a very cliched thing. But I think which is really cool is that when Harley Quinn jumps and is about to stab him in the eye, which I guess like is the big weakness, right? Because that's how they end up defeating him. I honestly thought like, oh man, I bet you like she's gonna stab him in the eye, and then she's just gonna slide down, and like all this eye goo and whatnot's gonna come out. But when she kind of like goes in and it's like made of water, I'm like, that's actually kind of a cool idea, because he probably any part of the Starro that is not his eye is probably very well armored, and like you shoot at it, you launch rockets at it, it's not going to do anything. But if you shoot anything into its eye, if it's water, like those bullets like would slow down, right? Or those rockets would like blow up in the water, but it wouldn't go far enough into those veins and things that the rats actually have to eat to take Starro down. So I actually thought that's actually kind of a cool design, that it's like the only way you'd know how to defeat him is like someone would have to be crazy enough as Harley Quinn to jump into his eye and realize that, oh, there's water in here, okay, and then all the rats just kind of take care of it. So I thought that part was pretty cool.
I've never been a fan of rodents, so that I was like, oh,
you're like Bloodsport. You're like, get these rats off screen, for crying out loud.
Yeah, but I didn't have like I don't have an origin story for, for why I don't like rats. Right. I just don't like. I've never been a fan of rodents.
No, that's fair.
So, but granted, like it was very humorous the way they, and like even having Taika Waititi pop in as like her dad, and it was like, oh, like learn from the rats.
Yeah, that's right.
It was surprisingly heartwarming.
Yeah,
for the context of what they're using that for.
Absolutely.
Now, were you aware that they're making a Peacemaker show when you saw this movie?
No, I had no idea until you told me 2 seconds ago.
Okay, so James Gunn during quarantine basically like wrote an 8-episode series about Peacemaker, and he pitched it to WB and for HBO Max, and they said, "Yep, we'll do it." So they literally filmed it this past fall. Like they
Oh,
just
wow.
finished filming it, like I think like a month
Okay.
ago, and they actually filmed it in Vancouver. So I was surprised when Peacemaker dies in the movie. I'm like, oh, I guess that shows a prequel because. And I don't know if you stayed for the post-credit scenes, but there's a post-credit scene at the very end of the movie that shows you that Peacemaker somehow survived the
Oh,
events of the
really?
movie.
No, I didn't. I only
Yeah.
saw the Weasel one where he gets up and goes away. I had to go to the washroom badly, so I was like, I'll learn about the post-credit scenes later. It's fine. I don't want to stand through 10
You
minutes.
didn't really
of
miss much. Basically, it just establishes, like, you see him in a hospital bed, and two of Waller's people are like talking about how they need him to save the world.
Wow. Okay.
But I was
Interesting.
like, this is how it sets up the Peacemaker show.
Yeah, it's funny.
Which, admittedly, I'm more interested in now because I actually enjoyed his character.
Yeah, it's funny. Earlier, you said you made some sort of comment about like, oh, we're pretty sure Peacemaker is dead, and I wanted to say, well, he is, right? But okay, I guess that's why we're still technically he didn't die if we see him at the end. If they're going to, but then again, like you say, maybe the show was a prequel, and maybe he does die at the end of this. But I feel like that post-credit scene is to show like, oh, he's alive, and that maybe the show will be after the events of the Suicide Squad.
Any other spoilery things you want to mention?
Oh, geez. I really liked the punchline when Bloodsport and Peacemaker are like showing how good they are at killing people. And they kill all these people, shoot people up, slice people in half, and then they get to Rick Flag, the tent that Rick Flag is in, and they open it up, and like they see they're kind of like, oh, just hanging out with drinks, and it's like, what's going on here? And then they're like, oh no, we're the good guys. And then the one girl asks, she's like, where are my men? I don't see them anywhere outside. And the characters are like, we didn't see anyone. I just thought that was actually like the whole scene of them killing people. I was like, it's fine. And then the moment they have to like lie and basically say, even though they get caught later on. But yeah, I thought that was so funny how they say they're like, oh, there was no one around. I thought it was a really great punchline to set up this joke that you don't know really is a joke until you get to that. There were lots of great moments. I also loved Ratcatcher talking about her backstory with Taika Waititi being her dad and seeing that in the window pane of the bus. And I love how when Bloodsport tells the story about him being in the crate with like hungry rats, I like how like we don't see that. And my interpretation was that Ratcatcher, I think we know Ratcatcher is not as much of a closed book as Bloodsport is. So I think we're allowed to see in her mind what happened. Whereas with Bloodsport, he's still very much like he's opening up a little bit, but maybe not as open as Ratcatcher. And we only get to hear about it. And I think it's actually kind of scarier to hear about a scenario like that than actually seeing it. So there are lots of decisions like that I thought were great. Like there's just so many great things, and Taika Waititi having that little flashback when Ratcatcher is trying to stop Starro, and he says like, oh, rodents are like the lowly, disgusting creatures, but they serve a purpose, and like seeing her just getting a little emotional because like the rats are kind of what saved the day at the end of the movie. I just thought that was great. I just like the movie kept on getting better as it went on. And even in like certain parts towards the end where like it felt a little slow, where I was like, the movie's pretty good. It would do something that would surprise me and go, holy crap, this is actually really good. And by the end of it, I was like, yeah, bravo. You had me, Mr. Gunn. I was expecting this movie to be decent at best, but it's a great movie.
So coming around now to final thoughts. As I said earlier, this is by far the superior Suicide Squad movie. Like if film historians like 50 years from now are trying to decide which Suicide Squad movie should we put in the history books, you should definitely put the Suicide Squad in. All the characters who return from the previous installment, even though they're the same actors, they feel like more complete characters. You can tell they're having more fun. The dialogue is very punchy. You get great character interactions. Yes, it's very violent. There's lots of crude humor. And so obviously it's not for children. But it breaks my heart that it isn't doing better financially. Agreed. Because I would certainly like to see more movies like this that are just kind of like crazy comic book fun. And with that being said, I'll probably give it 3.4 out of 4 back cookies.
I think the difficulty with a lot of comic book and superhero movies is that they can, sometimes like the MCU, all feel pretty similar, right? There's a lot of things in the formula that kind of tends to come back. And while the Suicide Squad definitely has some of that, it is more like Deadpool in the sense that, James Gunn had the freedom to do what he wanted. Like, this movie is horrifically violent and it's vulgar and there's so much profanity and a fair amount of disgusting things that happen, but it still has a heart. It's still entertaining. It's still exciting. It's still wonderful to look at. And there is so much there that actually makes this movie so worth seeing and makes you realize, makes you like the first one even less, because it makes you realize this is what a Suicide Squad movie should be. And yes, I would not recommend this movie for everyone, but I would say if you like movies in general, if you're 18 or older, and if you are okay with the violence and the language and whatnot, I would highly recommend this movie. It surprised me. It has way more flavor than the first one did. It has depth. It has a lot of the things that any good movie should have. And it's a movie that is not restrained. It is let loose, and it does its thing, and it does its thing so incredibly well. I will give The Suicide Squad 3.5 Batjar cookies out of 4.
So if you're interested in this movie, it is playing in theaters. Go see it, because it needs the help.
Please go see it.
It needs the help. It's not doing well. And if you're in the States, you can watch it for free on HBO Max. Mm-hmm. And I've said this many times, you lucky people.
Yes.
So many movies, like, if I could, I would pay for it, but I can't.
Yeah.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
This is normally when we would go inside the Bat Jar to pull a topic for next week, but Free Guy, the video game adjacent movie that Ryan Reynolds made that we've talked about many times because its release has been delayed so many times, is opening up in theaters. So our next episode is going to be about Free Guy.
Amazing. I'm actually so excited to, I've heard some good things about Free Guy, so I'm, very, very excited to see it.
So, of course, before we leave, I want to thank Ben the Movie Buff for coming in and bringing his movie buffness to this conversation about the Suicide Squad franchise and the challenges that these films have had. So thank you, Ben, for being here this week.
No worries. Always a pleasure. And I'm glad I loved the movie as much as I did, because I think that gave me more to want to discuss and talk about. So, yes, thank you as always for having me. It's always a blast.
So come back to the Bat Jar Podcast next week when we talk about Free Guy. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Ben the Movie Buff.
Catch you on the flip side.
See you in the next one.